The following presentation is called The Host of Reason. It is a depiction of the relationship between rational thought and all those other human perceptive constructs that just seem so out of place, like perhaps emotion, intuition, feelings, and instincts. It's given in three parts. One is the structure of reason, part two is the structure of instinct, and part three is the host of reason. Thanks to bigthink.com for the forum, and here it is, the host of reason. Part one. The structure of reason. So what is reason? What's our rational process? Well, it's a symbolic process. Many people agree that symbolism is intimately involved with reason. Symbols are the smaller, lesser representation of a greater concept or reality. And I say that reason is the effort to pare down the chaotic variables of the real world into a more manageable subset pertinent to our survival. It's kind of a shorthand for reality, our symbolic system. Take the symbol rock. We take an entire spectrum of naturally occurring mineral solids on the surface of the planet, from pebble to boulder size, and shrink it all down to one handy little symbol. We use dynamic symbols for time and temp action issues, and static symbols for aspects, physical aspects of our world. If we're out with our tribe, I might say, throw the rock at the caribou so it comes out here and I can hunt it. This way we pare down the chaotic variables of the hunt into a manageable few that are pertinent to our success at the hunt and thus our survival. Evolution has been doing this from the very start. Our senses, we can see, are little symbols, little simulations of the world running in real time in our heads. As we evolved from just animals, lower order animals, our eyes became hooked up to memory, a burgeoning memory that allowed us to remember these sensory inputs and play them back in our heads in a way that kind of simulated the world. We think of our simulation in our head, our subjective world, as a second us, but it's really our us. It's really a second place we can perceive. We have an ongoing simulation of the world as a kind of a laboratory, trial and error laboratory, to avoid the consequence of our failure and only figure out what might be successful and then do that in the real world. But it wasn't until about 100,000 years ago, when we developed a sufficiently large memory and a sophisticated world internal ability to simulate, that we blew open the doors of objectivity and the magic of reason could prevail. We normalized our symbolism. With the advent of language, we all could agree on what's the best way to symbolize the world and what were the best symbols to use that were durable and correct all the time. But even though we had all these symbols that we could all agree upon and assimilate into our language and integrate into the entirety of the human body of knowledge, it will be shown that none of it can exist, not a single symbol, but that it is not first perceived as the cross-association of elements of our instinct. Part two, the structure of instinct. So what is instincts and feelings and stuff? Aren't those just a bygone artifact of an old evolution, and now that we've evolved reason, we can just transcend all that? The answer is no. We've become far too over-specialized in reason, and it has blinded us to the fact that reason is entirely built on instinctive elements, that without an enormous library of instinctive, stimulus-driven responses, we would have nothing about which to reason. They're so difficult to reconcile because they are structurally inverted. Their structures are inverted from one another, and they don't cross-compile easily at all, reason and instinct. Reason takes little symbols and assembles them into a context that's situationally relevant to our survival. However, instinct is just the opposite. It takes a 300-million-year-old library of instinctive responses and delivers the survival relevance as stimulated in the situation by the stimulus of the real world. So you can see they're inverted. One starts with a context and gets extracted the local survival relevance, and the other starts with symbols, little relevant symbols, and builds a survival context. But that context is still just specific to certain situations for the most part. It can get a very large context, but never anywhere close to as large as the instinct. However, there is a wealth of human perceptive circumstance over which reason takes false jurisdiction. Issues like the sound of music, the color blue, love, all values, any ethics you care to mention, these are all naturally selected human constructs. Take the ideal that all people are created equal. rationally speaking, we can discern where, no, they're not. This one does this better, that one's bad at that one, that one's behavior is awful, and this one's crippled. We can see all manner of issues. However, there's part of us that wants to assert, don't go there. We should all treat each other as equally as we possibly can. This is a species-level survival trait, naturally selected over millions of years. In the next section, we will show how these types of instincts can be most easily identified by the relationship between the conditioned response and the instinct that gets conditioned. Part 3, the host of reason. Here's where the rubber meets the road. The conditioned response is reason. We can see that the conditioned response is the first memory, the element of memory, that is, an event gets stored in the neurological tissues and applied later, and the first symbol. Starting with Pavlov's dogs, Pavlov was studying the salivating habits of dogs when he would feed them, and noticed that a bell that had rung before he fed them over and over as part of the experiment began to make the dogs salivate. That is the first symbol. The dogs symbolize the food with the bell. You can see there's two instincts going on here. One is the sound response, the audio stimulus response, the original instinct of sound recognition by the dog, and the survival imperative of salivating over food, over the vision of food, or the acquisition or the taste of food. So you see the dog cross-associates two existing instincts for a situational survival relevance specific to that situation. We can see how this is the original symbol. This is the independence from the now in both structural terms and temporal terms. By expecting the food as proximate to the bell, the dog's perception gains independent from the instinctive moment. And by symbolizing the bell for the food, the dog gains independent from a one-to-one relationship in his instinct. Independence from the instinctive response is our thinking. We have a separate world that is temporally independent from the world around us and structurally independent, and it is built on a wide library of conditioning by the real world. So our internal world gets its real world symmetry from external conditioning. Therefore, we carry on that external conditioning in remembered cascades of stimulus responses. Once the Pavlov's dogs got the bell to make them expect the taste of food, that expectation, that food in the mouth, is a stimulus itself that further stimulates responses in a previously conditioned cascade of stimulus responses that mimic the way they originally were conditioned, the real world. So we can see that our thinking is an independence gained by the conditioned response. But perhaps most importantly, we need to realize that all this independence from the moment and all our powers of reason are built on the back of our instinct. Without an enormous library of sophisticated instinctive responses, there are no elements to cross-reference to build our symbols from. In other words, instinct, human instinct, is the neurological context from which all reason derives its survival relevance. So how do we see the value of instinct from behind the brilliance of our associations, of our conditioning? Well, we can at least winnow them away from each other by noticing that instinct resides more in the moment, and our thinking takes a little latency to get going. If you're in a high-rise office building and you walk up to a plate glass window, your immediate reaction is to go, I could fall, 14 floors up. Then your conditioning takes in. You go, well, I got glass in front of me. I guess it could be okay. Walk up, lean against it, look down, you're okay. Good to go. Unfortunately, that's the problem. Reason, one of its survival advantages is that it can situationally suppress even a treasured instinct like fear of falling. So you can see that our problem is, and this is not just individually, it's nationally, socially, everything. We have become over-specialized in reason. We have suppressed our instinct to a frightening degree. We're about to lose it. We're about to destroy the planet over the situational arguments of the few over the best interest of the species. You can bet your life that issues like equality, all people being created equal, humility, fairness, love, love of the planet, love of nature, love of each other, all these issues are entirely instinctive and can and are always argued into non-existence by those with situational survival interest in doing the opposite. if we don't find a way to elevate these common, very widespread human instincts above any rational argument, if we don't make these new symbols to put these ideas where they're supposed to be, you can bet your life we will pay for it. The planet has gotten too small. Admittedly, this has been an enormously oversimplified depiction of a very complicated subject. However, it does offer a baseline representation of the relationship between reason and all those more enigmatic aspects of human perception that we've had so much trouble putting into a rational perspective. Thanks to BigThink.com for the forum, and there you have it, the host of reason.